Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be introducing this afternoon's panel. My name is Fatima Farag. I am the founder and CEO of Bulad Al Balad Media, which is a local media company working in Egypt. I am also the regional director for Wana Ifra's Media Women in News program in the MENA region. You can't help but notice, looking at the media landscape in the Middle East over the past 2 years, how power play is really being played out within the media structures and the ecosystem. Look at the blockages in Egypt and you'll see that those people who control technology the most are able to control the media landscape. Look at the acquisitions that have happened within the region of media organizations, and you can see the consolidation of power within certain hands. How this landscape is developing and what spaces exist in it for independent and democracy fostering media is something that needs to be seriously considered. And so we have today with us on this panel people who are influential in terms of platforms, in terms of fact verification, in terms of understanding policy and advancing independent media and security of journalists to discuss how we can influence this media landscape for a better future. I'm handing over the moderation of this panel to my colleague, Annette Novak, who is a senior consultant for media development, working globally, former board member of the World Editors Forum, current vice president of Fojo Media Institute, and she also runs her own ICT company in Sweden. Without further ado, Annette.
Sorry. Thank you for that kind introduction, Fatima. And happy to see so many of you pushing off the evening drinks, maybe, to be here with us. This is a very important topic. You will be glad to know that there will be no slides. If you had enough of slides today, this is a non-slide panel. We're going to focus, of course, on what Fatima said, and also, I mean, we've been talking in the terminology almost of a battle going on, a battle of interests being played out, and specifically visible, perhaps, in the Middle East region. That was one of the reactions, at least, to one of the recent massive blockages of news sites in Egypt. What is this war about? What categorizes this battlefield? Who is winning? And how can we find strategies in order to save independent journalism in the current hostile context? Here on my right, I have one of the excellent panelists, Faraz Akkad. Maybe you can give us just a short brief explanation of your activity and what you bring to this table.
Sure. So, nice to be here. My name is Faraz Akkad. I head media partnership for Facebook for Middle East, Africa, Turkey, and Pakistan. So what my team is responsible for, we look after, the non-user generated content, relationship with broadcasters, publishers, celebrities, influencers, journalists, etc. And we across sports, entertainment, news, and social good for the region.
Thank you. To my left, I have Tom Trevenant, Director of Media. Also a short own introduction.
Yeah, hi everybody, it's nice to be here. So at Miden we build open source tools and training resources for journalists and translators. Since around 2011 we've been focused a lot on the question of verification and fact-checking of citizen media in particular, both from the perspective of wanting to make citizen media useful and usable to media outlets, but also from the perspective of trying to push back against some of the manipulation of social networks for the spread of misinformation that we've seen. And we've been very lucky to work with Jessica and Fatima on this project.
Thank you, Tom. And that brings us to Jessica Deer, co-founder and director of Social Media Exchange. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I run an organization in Lebanon called Social Media Exchange, or actually now it's just called Smex. It's been around for about 10 years, and we do digital rights research and advocacy. And within that, what we're doing is researching the state of free expression online, the state of privacy online, surveillance, and other kinds of aspects or angles on human rights in digitally networked spaces across the Middle East.
Thank you. We're trying to divide this discussion into 3 blocks. One that's going to center around tech, both the pros and the cons, and after that block we'll be happy to take some questions for the panel. Middle ground will be the media arena discussion, and at the end we will do a discussion around constructive ways forward. So please think of your questions, because I will jump onto you there in between, not just only at the end. So any technology, I was thinking when we were preparing this panel, when the spade was invented, you know, we could use it to build, to dig, to make things better. But very soon somebody used the spade to kill a fellow human being. In some way, I mean, tech has always been this facilitator and vulnerability in anything human beings have been doing. And with the internet, and in some sense also with the platforms, we have lowered the threshold for expression, democratization of opinion, but also opened up new vulnerabilities. So from your different perspectives and experiences, would you care to, anybody care to take the microphone and say anything about what you see as the major points of that?
I can start. So, I mean, obviously, you know, for us, we see it as a way to provide access to people to be able to communicate to a large interested audience. So if I go back a few years, and I come from the broadcast world, when journalists used to have to report on a story, especially in the field, you'd have to go, you record the story. If you wanted to go live, you have to have an OV van. OV van uplinks to a satellite. Satellite comes down. Somebody has to have a receiver. It's a production, and usually there is a delay. You have to be probably associated with an established organization, and there is an editorial direction that is put on you by the newsroom manager or whoever, the channel ownership, etc. So we've shortcutted all of that. I think the ability today for people to go live on Facebook or Instagram and be able to report from the field, whether you're a journalist or a concerned citizen, and be able to reach a very large number of people, whether you are, again, you know, associated with a large organization or not, is something really powerful. And I think it's done at a very cost-efficient manner. It gives people the freedom and gives everyone a soapbox to express their opinion. I think that, you know, we start from this overarching benefit, and obviously, you know, there are nuances, and you know, we make mistakes, and we try, you know, in good spirits to fix those mistakes as fast as possible. But I think we have to go back, you know, 5-7 years ago when that wasn't possible. And I think a lot of the mistakes or the challenges that we face today are stemming from a new reality, which is a new exciting reality where you can report on things that you couldn't do in the past. And that has led to some really interesting dynamics in our society, and an interesting way to report the news.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah. Sure. So I'll try and this will be a little bit about my organization, but I am not originally from the Middle East. I moved to Lebanon about 12 years ago. I married a Lebanese man, and we started an organization, Smex. And when we first started this organization, it was 2008. We were training people how to use social media, specifically people in civil society or other independent activists or journalists. How do you use Twitter? What is Twitter? What is Facebook? What's a Facebook page? How is it different from a group? Very basic sort of social media stuff. And sort of like really trying to realize the promise that everybody was talking about with these new digital tools. Yes, your cameras were much smaller. You didn't need a satellite link up. You had the internet. In Lebanon, we had very slow internet at the time, so even that was a bit of a challenge. But that was really a spirit in which we, and me as a former journalist, got involved in this. About halfway between then and now, there was a law that came up in Lebanon that we said is probably not good for this digital space. It was an e-transactions law. It had all kinds of strange stuff, warrantless search and seizure, as well as a lot of good stuff. And we kind of dipped our toe in working with several other organizations into the sort of policy advocacy space. And it was at that point where we really started to become aware of the enabling environment of this digital space. That was in 2010. 2011 was just around the corner. I think we were even together, right? Well, we were together in Beirut, and then again maybe in San Francisco when Tunisia, when Ben Ali fell, And so we saw 2011, and we were all kind of like, wow, look at all this stuff that's going on, you know? Like, we were right, this is great. Here are these revolutions, these wonderful outcomes in Tunisia and then Egypt. And then again, we started to see very quickly after the so-called Arab Spring, that space, civic space, all this civic space that had supposedly opened up in the previous years, given people blogging platforms and space to talk in ways that they couldn't necessarily in many of the countries talk even in person without risking detention or investigation or their lives or start to close down again very quickly. And so for that reason, we continue to sort of look at the policy aspects of the space. And I'll just sort of say in terms of the technology, that specific question about the benefits of the technology, so those are the benefits. And at the same time, after the Arab Spring, governments really started to get wise in what they also saw that there's a proof of concept here. They also saw that, yes, these are powerful tools in the hands of powerful people, in the hands of people who have a mission and have a vision for what they want. And the asymmetrical a sort of platform that these tools provided by democratizing access to media very quickly reverted to the asymmetrical power structures of the governments in whose hands they were. And this has meant primarily that, yes, we still see censorship and blocking, but I think one of the key things that we see is a real uptake in the deployment of digital surveillance and surveillance of digital communications. And that's something that governments will always be able to do asymmetrically better than the people that they're monitoring.
So Miden is primarily a kind of technology organization, and we build open source tools for this work. So in 2009 to 2011, I was living in Egypt, and we had at the time a distributed team of reporters and translators and editors. And so in the early days of what was going on in Tunisia and then Egypt and Syria, Libya, Bahrain, we were finding a lot of citizen voices and citizen media that was being published in Arabic to Twitter, to Facebook, to YouTube. And we were curating and translating a lot of that media. And it was a really remarkable process because there was a lot of content and voices and images and video that simply wasn't being shown or wasn't being picked up either by mainstream media in the Arab world nor in the West. And so we saw a real kind of value and opportunity in the kind of content that was being shared and facilitated by the platforms. And kind of as we were working on this and kind of in that same moment, we realized that there was also a risk that the stuff we were finding and translating was misinformation or was fake. Or misleading or disinformation or rumors spread by regimes who were very quick to catch on to the potential of manipulating social networks for their own benefit. And so we started working in a kind of collaborative way to define processes and training resources for how can we verify this new kind of media that seemed so important, and I think is still important. If you look at Syria, for example, we wouldn't know a fraction of what we know about the conflict there if it weren't for the work of very committed media activists and journalists who go to the street and video strikes and clashes and war crimes on a daily basis, and they die for that work. So I think there's technologies enabling there, right? But at the same time, we also see that the platforms have been a little, I think they've been a little slow to realize the role that they're playing and kind of take responsibility for that role. I was in Berlin last summer with the Syrian Archive. They store a lot of videos, they scrape them from YouTube and store them. And we saw in the space of about 4 weeks, there were 400,000 videos from Syria were removed from YouTube in a process that was totally opaque. The people on the ground had no recourse to appeal. In one case, there was one channel, Shem News Network, which had over 100,000 videos dating back to the start of the conflict that was removed for a kind of mysterious community community guidelines violation. And so this was actually what we realized later was the introduction of new technology into the moderation of content on YouTube. And so we can see technology enabling, but at the same time, there's a real risk that unless we consider the kind of social consequences of that, then the technology can also do great harm and kind of undo a lot of good work that's been done by people who've likely died to capture these moments.
Yeah, you'll get to answer here soon, but we were discussing before, and I think it has to do with this. I mean, this is the first time in history where we have a platform that has this massive scale, that has this enormous amount of content to handle. I mean, even the biggest media companies in the mass media era didn't ever have this type of scale of content. So of course, a new situation demands new methods, and here, of course, the platforms are still searching, but maybe you can say something about how you're dealing with this at this point.
Right. So, ultimately our goal in our mission is to basically bring the world closer together and try to bring ideas closer together. And with that, just to give you some scale of, we have 2.2 billion people on the platform today. In the Middle East, we're roughly around 170 million people. There's 800 million people on Instagram, 1.2 billion on WhatsApp, another 1.2 billion on Messenger. So the scale of amount of information that is uploaded is just scary. There's almost like 100 million birthday wishes a day. So the goal, and we take this responsibility quite seriously, and a lot of it, to make it feasible, is through machine learning and through AI, that some of the content gets taken down, but a lot of it gets escalated. And we are now looking at hiring about 20,000 people who actually look through and make judgment calls on the questionable type of content that it escalates. Generally, we have a community guidelines where these are very basic things that I think nobody would disagree around: child abuse and certain pornographic content, etc., that's taken down automatically. It's where it gets to the gray areas where it requires human intervention and people coming in. Like I said before, we do make mistakes. Sometimes these mistakes are made when you're dealing with like billions and billions of data points. However, I think overall, the aggregate result is that people are given a voice, and usually we try to maintain a balanced scale. Well, despite pressures, even whether they come from government entities or whatever, we try to provide people with a voice, and it's not always an easy call. I get politicians who will reach out and say, I'm being defamed on this page, and this is harming me. And if they're public figures, then that has special considerations in terms of, well, you're a public figure and people are expressing their opinions against you. And so it doesn't always make you friends in every aspect. But I think that the vision and the mission of bringing the world closer together and providing a platform is something that is quite interesting. There's another couple of stats that I want to mention that I think also can put things in perspective. In the Middle East, we have actually the largest free-to-air channels per capita in the world. We have about 1,300 free-to-air channels. Now, if I ask any of you who've lived in the Middle East to name 10, maybe. If to name 15, I think some of you will be pressed to name 15. And that's perfectly okay, because roughly, the first 3 groups control probably 80% of the viewership. The first 1 group controls 50% of the viewership. And so when you look at it from that point, and by the way, when people talk about, say, Al Arabiya or Al Jazeera and these guys who probably came as a form of new generation of news, a little bit more open, a little bit more critical, but even then, you have to go through an editorial desk. Right? You can't just, not every opinion, every one of these channels has funding that skews them a certain way. So when you talk about that, and you see where we've come now, where we can talk about specific pages that you might follow, niche interests that you might follow, you'll find that it did provide a lot of freedom. It did provide a lot of voice to the voiceless, and it also, as a consequence, made the larger organizations be a lot more careful on what they want to report, because they didn't have a monopoly on the hearts and minds anymore. So I think it's these dynamics, not just on what happens on the platform, but the existence of the platform drives and puts a spotlight and makes sure that all the other broadcasters are held a lot more accountable on how they report.
I don't think there's anybody who actually fights the fact that there would be some kind of filtering or that, and then we all do filtering in our platforms. However, I think the main point of criticism is the opacity, and I think Tom was referring to that, and the fact that there is no open process around it where people can understand and learn from it, and where we could also provide. I think traditional publishers feel that they are sitting on a capital of know-how from all the hundreds of years where we've been curating everything that we would like to transmit, and we're waving to have a forum for that, I think, in some sense. Would you like to comment on that?
I think it's fair, and the challenge, I think, for the newsrooms is that we regularly change the algorithm, or this mysterious algorithm. that it's not that mysterious. Basically, the algorithm is always going to work to try to provide the user with the content that we feel is most likely that they want to consume based on their behavior and the behavior of others. So it's always trying to give them things that they want to see. So with that in mind, and we always have the user in mind, even the recent changes that we made where as of the beginning of the year we prioritize friends and family, which means actually that people will spend less time on the platform, but we feel that this is something that they'll spend less time, but it'll be more quality time, and it's better for the longevity of the platform. Even those changes that might actually have short-term detriment financially to the organization, they're made with the user in mind. And so it's in a sense, yes, we try to do these outreach programs. We've launched a Train the Trainer program in the Middle East where we're hoping to train 3,000 journalists this year, have journalists train journalists on best practices, what works, what doesn't. And I think, especially in the Middle East, there's like basic things that are not being addressed, like IP rights. You can't use music or footage from someone else, and that will cause the page to be shut down. Things of the sort. And we aim to do that, but it's also, I think, we want to encourage. We provide the tools also for traditional publishers to experiment, do some A/B testing, and see what works for their particular audience. Because the algorithm is quite consistent, and so if you experiment, you'll see what works for you.
Thanks, Tom.
I'd push back on the idea that the algorithm's quite consistent. We've seen pretty big changes in the last 6 months, particularly regarding news. And I think there's a lot of publishers in the room who could speak to the drop in traffic that they've seen and the drop in referrals that they've seen from Facebook. And I think there's an issue there because there's kind of been a dependency created in terms of the distribution opportunities for media. If we look in Egypt, for example, websites are blocked. Facebook is the only platform where people can publish and distribute their news, and that's great, but at the same time there's kind of a tremendous dependency and a kind of an asymmetry in the power there that makes journalists very susceptible to a change in algorithm that comes from somebody sitting in an office in Silicon Valley, is then going to have very serious impacts on the work of journalists working in Damascus or Cairo, and I think that that's something that we have to take very seriously.
So what is your suggestion, Tom, that how would you want to see it done?
I think what everybody's struggling with is understanding what the rules of the algorithm are, and again, I think it's a question of transparency. I heard somebody the other day say that Facebook making their algorithm transparent would be like Coke revealing their recipe, but I don't think that's quite true in the case of Facebook, because there's such a network effect, a scale that's been reached that it's not, you could give your algorithm away to somebody else, but they're not going to get 2 billion users and be a kind of realistic challenger. So I think, and maybe not full transparency is required, but I think there's an opportunity for more awareness amongst publishers about what are the rules of the game, and if the goalposts are going to be shifted, what does that mean?
So more care for the effects, actually, of the...
Yeah. Well, can I just quickly provide? I just want to put also in context something regarding the algorithm. There is, at one point we're getting about 1.5 million new users a day on the platform. And so what happens is there's exponentially, it's a math equation, right? At any given point, there's only so much that could be displayed in front of you. And as more people come on the platform and as more publishers come on the platform, that real estate becomes even tighter. And so we need to, the algorithm started by chronologically listing any information that somebody uploads that is relevant to you. So I upload something and then you might upload something and that will come in that order. And then that just didn't become effective. So now with 2.2 billion, it's much different than when we had 1 billion and when we had 2 billion. So at any given time now, you'll have, any moment you log on, you'll have over 1,500 potential things that we could display to you. And we have to prioritize them somehow, right? And that's where we try to provide, I think also, it's a fairly complex system that takes into consideration so many things, and there are so many variables that are so relevant to your region and your particular audience. That's why our approach so far has been to provide you with the tools to be able to figure out what seems to be working for your particular audience, rather than say, it's here are the rules and this will work for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately.
Jessica?
Okay. So, I'm trying to process all of that. Because I heard at one level, I heard at one level that the algorithm is fairly straightforward, and I heard at the other level it's very complex and there are many factors and many variables. I think all I want to say about it, because is that, and I also have heard that we need to implement the algorithm because we're operating at such a huge scale. Yet then I'm also hearing that it's being customized to produce news at different levels in different regions. I am not working in a newsroom, and I'm not using Facebook in a newsroom, so I can't really speak to those differences that people perceive on a daily basis. But what I can say is that us as a digital rights organization, as an advocate for people who are trying to use the internet to do good journalism and independent journalism, that transparency in how the algorithm works, agency over how the algorithm works, and input into it. As I said earlier in our conversation, Facebook has no parliament, has no Congress. We have no representation on this platform, and so yet it works at the scale of larger than any government on earth. And so really, it's about making these things more transparent and clearer to the rest of us, so that we can understand how we want to manipulate the platform for our benefit.
As well. All right, so from my point of view, as someone who's producing content and using Facebook to disseminate that, there is serious financial implications to the role that Facebook is playing, platforms are playing. My ability to actually promote my content on the site and actually make money off of them, and how much money the platforms are making off of the content that I'm putting up there, and the fact that I don't get any percentage from this. This is something that has serious implications on my ability to continue to provide content and for others to do so as well. So I understand that there are, obviously the content is massive and that decisions have to be made as to what can be displayed, but those decisions are usually based on criteria that probably would not make this a place which was a fair or equal playing field for everyone. And this has serious implications when you consider the overall media ecosystem, where the more powerful are dominating every other medium, print, television, etc. So I mean, this is one of the few areas where we felt that we had that space, and that is also being taken away because of business model decisions. The other thing is this idea of the transparency around the process and what role newsroom management has in understanding what's happening before it happens, especially as we invest so much in our teams and in our strategy and in our future planning to adapt to the systems that already exist. And we're always sort of running after the changes. So the changes happen, and in the Middle East, it's not just that we run after to see what happened in Facebook and now how we need to adapt to that. We wind up looking to the Western media, seeing what they're doing effectively, then learn it from them. Then by the time we finally get a way to implement it, our end, it's changed, and everyone has started again. And so creating this direct relationship also between people who are managing media business at their very different levels and very different guises in the region, and the platforms and that policy-making sort of body and those changes, as opposed to this very circumvented sort of way, is again something that might be considered.
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair statement. I'm fully cognizant of newsrooms constantly having to kind of adjust. To disclaim kind of when I say, the simplicity of the concept of what we try to do with the algorithm is consistent in the sense that we'll always put the user first. So we're always adjusting the algorithm to what we see the user behavior changes are. And people blame, the platforms are changing the way people consume. It's more that people are changing the way people consume, and we are keeping up. We're probably, maybe trailblazing in the sense that we are trying to keep up with the way people are consuming, and then as a spillover effect, content creators are having to adjust to that. But we're never saying to consumers, consume this way, and then because just we designed it that way. It's more of a, here's how you're consuming, and this is why we're trying to adjust to you. There's many initiatives around the funding, and we're now rolling out subscription services for publishers. Not as relevant for MENA because we're not a subscription market, but it's available. We're rolling out ad breaks. We've rolled out instant articles, which initially was rolled out to allow publishers to not only be able to sell ads on their content, but also to upload content in areas where there's low bandwidth. It can go up fairly quickly, load up 10 times faster.
Okay, thank you. We just can't just
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about. So we went a little bit into the business model here and the money sharing, and I think that actually brought us into the second part of this, which is about who has the power, and you were talking about the fact that the producers are losing leverage due to this, and I don't know if you care to, maybe you would like to say something about that. Is there any?
I think I was just in Egypt last week. We saw another website shut down, editor-in-chief fired, even a newspaper that was relatively compliant and basically following the government line. So I see the main struggle for space is one between a state that wants to, and we see this in other parts of the Middle East for sure, but as a state that wants to exercise very tight control over a very specific narrative and is not willing to tolerate even the slightest dissenting voices. In Syria, we see that at a very different level. There was just the Center for Justice and Accountability just published their court case around the targeting of journalists and Marie Colvin, who was killed for her reporting. And so we see this at different levels, and we also see it translated to the digital sphere with the direct censorship of 500, is it 500 websites now in Egypt in the past year or so. We've also seen in the Gulf the use of bots to spread sectarian hatred and kind of inflamed tensions that exist. So the states, and this is true of other parts of the world too, Mexico, for example, but states are very savvy to the potential of this tool, and I think we're naive if we think that these can only be used for kind of our own benefit and our own community, our own narrative purposes. There, I think states are increasingly wise to ways to manipulate social networks and technologies for their own ends.
So you're saying the oppressive states, they are ahead? That's what you're saying?
They have vastly more resources available to them, so it's, yeah, I think Jessica said it's a very asymmetrical power dynamic.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the arena right now, right? So I just kind of wanted to start with something that I hear from journalists in the Middle East a lot, which is that I think it's really important for people who maybe don't live in the region or haven't had a lot of experience in the region to understand that the systems and the laws, the legal frameworks, are really not designed to protect the citizen. They're designed to protect the state and the status quo. And this isn't me saying this. This is me hearing this many times over from journalists working in the region. And we have to understand how that works, we have to think a little bit about what that fundamentally does to how you perceive of things like facts, how you perceive of things like journalism. A lot of the journalism that is done in the region is done at the behest of the state. I think, as was said on the Survival in the Middle East panel yesterday, saying that, you know, the dictator wants to be the Superman, and the journalist's job is to make sure that that reflection is maintained. So what does this do to fact and information? And so I think what I see a lot coming from the West, whether it's through Western media development programs, whether it's through Western platforms, is starting with the fundamentally wrong premise that the state or that the company can be user-centered or citizen-centered in this environment. It's very, very difficult. I often say, in terms of fake news, for example, it's really bothering me that this fake news agenda is being driven, and it's being driven right through the Middle East, where fake news and false news provisions exist in almost every penal code in the region and are used and have been used for at least a lot of years to silence opposition. And it is not about fact-checking and verification in the way that, you know, yes, we need fact-checking and verification, but once we elevate this narrative that's been created on the back of, you know, that Donald Trump has popularized, and then we re-export it back to the region, it does a lot of damage. It empowers these systems to only entrench these things. And also, I'll just say, one of the interesting things about false news is that it was initially exported to the region from colonialist powers. It comes from Britain, it comes from the UK, false news, which comes from the church courts after the Norman conquest. It has a millennium-long trajectory. So let's not forget that this interplay has been going on for a very, very long time, and that this affects entirely the idea of journalism in the public interest in this region, and the fact that we need to understand that before we can go along and have any other conversations. I'll say another 2 examples of how it's happening today, not just with fake news, with anti-terrorism laws. This is an agenda, again, that has been produced through the Western powers, and I believe, and I'm doing research now on the legal frameworks in all these countries, of how anti-terror laws are being, certainly there is pressure being placed on regional governments to pass anti-terror laws, and then they're being templated from country to country, and they all affect free speech. And anti-cybercrime laws are the other one. They're being templated from country to country through agencies like the UN, and they are criminalizing speech just because it occurs on an electronic or digital device. So this is the context, this is the media arena, and it's not just the platforms, and it's not just the regional governments, it is also external governments, and all of this is being played, and my position on this as an advocacy organization, one of our key target audiences is journalists, because we want to educate them on these flows, especially Western journalists, on these flows, and also from within the region. What does it mean to report on biometrics? What does it mean to report on data protection? What does it mean to report on these different things? Because our journalists so far are not yet aware enough or skilled enough or knowledgeable enough to report on these things effectively. That's my rant.
Just on the, one of the things that worries me a lot, especially about the countering violent extremism narrative and also the fake news narrative, is that we've seen a lot of funding shift from money that was going to support independent media groups being diverted towards these programs whose efficacy is very dubious and unproven. My strong suspicion is probably the best way to combat violent extremism and fake news is to put the money right back into independent journalism. And I think that's something that we need to start talking about much more.
It's a very grim picture you're painting, so it is. There's in the US, and maybe this is really out of context here because we're talking Middle East, but there was this Trump bump in digital subscriptions. So the flooding of and I won't use the FN word because I think that's part of what the propagandists want us to use. I will say it's propaganda, or it's misinformation or disinformation or lies. News is news, not something else. But anyway, can this, I mean, sometimes we have to go through really harsh phases in order to come out on the other side stronger. And has this, in any way, do you think, put the limelight on things that have been going on for a long time, and now more general audiences can understand the difference? And is this an opportunity also, maybe? I mean, I know this is a provocative question, because what you're talking about is life and death for a lot of people. But still, could there be that this is now on everyone's lips? Everybody talks Trump and lies and media. Could that be an opportunity?
I don't find the same conversations in the Middle East, because there's as Jessica was saying, the kind of default position is that the state media is lying to us, and those institutions have no credibility, and that's long been the case. So it's not a...
Or everyone has their agenda, as in the case of Lebanon, right? Where all of the media is, different channels are very much based on the political party, which is very much based on the sect that you belong to. And so everyone, I mean, actually people are very media literate in the sense that they've been receiving these different information streams for a very long time, and are able with a lot of nuance to parse and understand who's telling them what and what that actually means. And so the idea that that's the problem is really not what we think is the problem.
I think, it's funny, because we have these global meetings and global calls, and different people look after different regions. So in my region, which Middle East, Africa, and Turkey, I think in Pakistan, it applies to all of them. When we get on these calls, and my colleague from the Nordics or Germany is like, fake news is where we really need to focus. And you're absolutely right. And for us, in the region, we have other problems, but this is not really the biggest one. I think we all grew up with some version of fake news. So I'm always very impressed by the simplest man on the street and how sophisticated they are in understanding, where's the money coming from, where tabi'in, they belong to this guy. So immediately they figure it out, and they manage to filter out the nuggets of news in that, very elaborate kind of biased story. So it's surprising. I mean, the silver lining of this type of regime is that people have grown to be able have a healthy skepticism of what they read and see, and they're able to kind of filter through it. Even now with like the strikes that just happened on Syria, if I read it in Western blogs and I read it in Arabic blogs, there's a lot more of a sophisticated dialogue that's happening, I think, with people in the region, really understanding the nuances of it and putting emotions aside and being able to actually have a deeper understanding of why and what the consequences are and what the real drivers, versus well-intended people in the West who read it and see it in a different way.
So the battle, actually, when I hear now, we have media literate people, very capable of navigating this complex landscape. So, but we still also have, and this is something that you gave me in the preparatory discussions, we also have attention problems, because what we would like them to take in and consume, and what they actually consume is not always the same thing, or very rarely. So you had that interesting number. Maybe you can just cite that as
just an anecdote that I mentioned earlier in our meeting. When the Arab Spring first kicked off, in Tunis, and the Tunisian Revolution first started brewing, I think it was day 5 or 6. Like, it was in the first week, where it was quite news, and I think in retrospect, it's probably looks like quite a promising uprising. It was the least bloodiest when you compare it to the other ones, and at the same time, there's Arabs Got Talent, which is our version of Got Talent, was going on air, and Arabs Got Talent was trending first. Actually, it was trending first worldwide at one point. It's a very popular show. The Tunisian Revolution was 5th. And it was quite interesting, because I was in the broadcast world at the time, and the host, Ali Jaber, is a friend of mine, and we were like congratulating him. And he was like, I heard I beat the Tunisian Revolution. And he wasn't pleasantly surprised by it. I mean, he was like, and we were all taken back that not only the Arab people in the region were watching that more on TV. They were also reacting to it more on social. And yeah, it begs the question of when people say, is it the platform? We talk about the design. Is it what people want to see? But it was quite consistent across all platforms, even traditional media, that people were more interested in what was happening on Got Talent than they were in the Tunisian revolution, which I realized it was Tunis, but it was speaking to probably every Arabic country.
Do you recognize this Fatima, who's also in the production? And
well, yes. but before going on to that, I want to step back to what Jessica was saying about the fact that the newsroom itself, and I always like to go back to that level of this conversation, that there is a lack of literacy around these trends and topics and policy decisions that are being made and within the newsroom. And it is true that the overall structure of media is propagating fake news, is built up to support the current authoritarian structures that are in place. I think yesterday someone from Egypt was Abdel Fattah that was saying that these media structures in mainstream media are more dangerous than the authoritarian rule itself. And I mean, we've seen governments come and go, and it's like the same people in the media don't go anywhere. They're there upholding whatever regime comes into place. So I mean, there's something to that. But I put a lot of stock in individual journalists who are within the mainstream and who are building up the new media sector, and the need to create better awareness and literacy around those topics. There was a point in time, like 5 years ago, when we all had to start learning about business. And it was no longer good enough for a media person or a media manager to say that they didn't understand a media business. And so that was the thing that we needed to learn. And I think now we need to move on, and that it's not good enough for me not to understand internet universality principles. And yes, this becomes an integral part of what it is that we need to know, so that we can make decisions about how it is that we deal with audiences who are thinking about different things very legitimately, and not just in the Middle East, but elsewhere.
No, I hope it was clear that I was talking more about state media structures and not independent. Yeah, and I think, frankly, while maybe not at this conference, but I tend to see very little tech reporting, even in the United States, that can really deal very deeply and with nuance with a lot of the issues that we cover in terms of surveillance and privacy. I mean, there are very few, there are some really good ones, absolutely, but it's not like they're everywhere and in every newsroom. And in fact, in the last panel I was on the ethics of working with social media, there was, a conversation about we need more explanation about how these work. Not just, the tech journalist knows it, but the sports journalist doesn't, and the politics journalist may not, if they're, and the healthcare journalist may not, unless so it's not a Middle East problem. But I think what I'm trying to say is that with what is happening politically and with the way that the digital space and therefore the civic space is being constricted in the Middle East, it is actually urgent in our region.
Tom? Oh, I think we have some questions. We have questions. We have lots of questions. Excellent. Can we have a microphone?
Yes. Hi. I think I'm among many who don't want to miss the opportunity having all of you together here to pick your brains. I do data journalism training in developing countries, and about 2 years ago I created an Arabic language data journalism training manual for Sudan, which sort of lied dormant for a couple years after I did the program. And this year, so to answer that question, is this an opportunity? Just this year I've been contacted by universities in Kuwait and Palestine, and by Infotimes in Egypt, and by Bayonet Box in Lebanon, and all of a sudden everybody wants to know, how do we do data journalism for that exact angle? Can we redefine journalism in this weird time where we have an opportunity to sort of inform citizens about civic engagement? But then you run up into that problem of, okay, great, everybody wants to learn data journalism. The media is really polarized. There seems to be enough data. But if you do have this demand, like, what do you guys see as a good entry point? Like, should we go with the university level so we can sort of redefine what journalism is for emerging journalists? Do we go with professional journalists? Like, how do you see sort of an opportunity to reintroduce fact-based journalism through data-driven reporting and sort of catch up Middle East media on this kind of booming trend of civic engagement through data journalism?
I think we've been working with Smex and BCU with groups at Lebanese University, for example. It's a public university in Lebanon, and I think in Beirut. And I think there's a real hunger and need there for new training. You know, the students that we work with are like sponges for anything that they can get. I think the general standard of instruction is high, but is kind of out of date. I think that's true of many journalism schools in the West also. So I think it's important to engage at that level, because those are the people who are going to be going into newsrooms, 3 years down the line, and there's a real opportunity to kind of shift that or help that generation of journalists. I think there's an opportunity there for sure.
I would also echo that. I would say that even in my organization, we're really starting to focus on how can we use data more effectively. We've built, for example, a data set of law, which is not really data in a numerical sense, but it's legal information, and we will be using that to visualize. We've already done some tests. What I was going to say, though, is if you're doing data visualization, one of the challenges that you're going to hear, or data journalism, one of the challenges you're going to hear all the time is, oh, there's not enough data in the region. And I think this is not true, number one. Number two, I think any course like that should really also teach data collection. And because I think while there is enough data, we need more of it, and we need cleaner and better data as well. So, and we need data that is produced from within the region, and not simply data that is taken from other people's observations and the objective look at what's going on in the region, which is why we started creating our own data sets. So I think it's great, and I think you should definitely go for it. And I don't know about different levels. Maybe people who are working more professionally as journalists in the region would have some more to say on that.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll take a second question. They don't listen to me anymore. No, it's go ahead.
It's
the two Linas.
It's Lina or Lina.
She's very patient.
Okay, I have two quick questions. Number one is I owe Facebook $17.50 because if I want to have a chance of sharing a story and getting it read, like 1% of getting it read among the, like millions of cute cats and pandas and Arabs Got Talent and all this, I'm gonna have to pay money as a journalist out of my already meager salary in our region. And I don't know why it has to work like that. And the second question is, we stopped having photo albums, and I stopped having a show reel or an archive of my work as a journalist, because it's all there online. It's all there on the different platforms. Yet at the same time, we have lost all the archive of the revolutions because they were reported by the regime and all these people against the revolution. We don't have an archive of it. So I don't know. I mean, if the content is deleted, how do we get it back? And it brings me back to the spade image that you mentioned in the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's look, the challenge, obviously, whoever you talk to, even if you talk to NBC about Arabs Got Talent, they'll say we don't have enough reach. Right? Everyone at at their scale wants to get more reach, and this is why some of these rules apply. And unfortunately, for professional publishers, what has happened in the beginning of the year is we said, we're actually, as a platform, we're just going to go back to prioritizing friends and family. So friends and family now come first. Your pictures of your grandma and pictures of your vacation, that's what's going to show up first. But we're giving people the option to say, I want to follow this person, or I want to follow this organization. And they can opt to put it, and it still shows up on top of their profile before anything else comes in. So we're having this, and then also we're encouraging publishers to do content that does what we call meaningful social interaction, which is content that drives a conversation. And this is the type of content that's, from a professional standpoint, is going to start rising up in the algorithm. And the reason is we found that most of our users felt better about themselves and about the experience when they were able to connect and engage with the content. So friends and family obviously is very engaging and connecting, and then content that is meaningful social interaction, which helps drives it up. Boosting is always an option. Boosting is a way for you to surgically target a certain region, a certain interest group, etc. If you're trying to explore new markets. But from an organic standpoint, it gets competitive, and we try to encourage people and provide tools to help them identify who's watching when and what. Now, on the archiving, it's a misconception. You know, we don't take down anything that any government just says take down. It's not that straightforward. There's things that have to be taken. There's so many things that are taken into consideration. And if you ask any government in the Middle East, they'll have a pet peeve about us, you know, being too liberal with allowing people to do what they want. And our standard generally is when things are reported, unless they violate any of our specific community standards, they are kept on there. If they escalate to a certain point, and sometimes we do make mistakes, and if we do make mistakes, we usually come up and say this was a mistake. You can contest a certain takedown, and we will look into it. And if we have made a mistake, we will put it back up. And there are, you know, documented situations where that has happened. But you know, for many people, it is, you know, it's a depository where you put all of your, or my photo albums. It's my main contacts now is available there. So, you know, it's always, if it's something really valuable, I always suggest that it's always good to maintain your own backup of it. But generally speaking, for many people, it's there and it's fine. You know, we've never had a situation where we've just, without any violation of our standards, just gone and deleted anyone's profile.
Are you happy with that reply? Or you want?
I can't find any videos of the revolution at all, and they were there. They were there on Facebook.
It's
like you know, Asr Nil Bridge, the battles of 28th of January in Egypt, in Syria, Homs, and all, like the beginning of the revolution in Libya as well. It was, you know, it was the only channel that shows this.
You're talking about a specific page or just in general?
I'm talking about the videos. I'm talking about videos.
Yeah, but on a specific page?
Were they all in the same place?
Were they on a page and now you can't find them on that page? Or you just
no,
don't
they were
see
just
it?
on Facebook that you would see it.
Yeah, but I mean, but my point is they're probably on that page. They're just not there anymore, prevalent, because other things have taken their place. But if they are on a page,
no,
say,
but you search by hashtag.
Yeah, you
like
can.
this.
So, but that's.
Then you can't find it.
I mean, anecdotally, and I think there was some initial research that was done 1 year after Jan 25, 2011, looking at Storyfies that showed that I think there was like 25% of the media had gone. Now it's not all been taken down. Users take down their own content too, so it's not as straightforward as you know, Facebook doing it. But I think the key question is that we have to start preserving this off the platforms, and we can't rely on them to be the archives for these things. And so the work the Syrian Archive is doing is really amazing. For us at Czech, we're trying to make the archiving process as kind of robust as we can and automated, so as, you know, because especially when you're fact-checking, verifying stuff, it's that content that gets disappeared. So we've integrated with the Internet Archive and archive.is. We have video capture. We're doing screen grabs. So I think it's important that for us as on the, you know, tools building side and the activist side and the archivist side, that we really need to not rely on the platforms anymore for this.
Finally.
It's the cost of being Facebook in a media conference. It's a bit of a simplistic question. So notwithstanding this, this discourse of user-centrism, which I think, or giving the users what they need, which I think is an epistemological disaster, and I hope we don't do that in media. And also notwithstanding the notion of user-centrism, again, when we know that in the context of Facebook, user is also so much of a product as much as they are users. So I'm just wondering, from a pure business perspective, does it make any sense to give an option to users to not navigate the platform through an algorithmic, through your algorithmic decisions, and something that is completely free, like the good old days when it was just chronological? So I know that there are certain solutions, such as, yeah, you can, consciously and deliberately choose to follow this or follow that. But how about just complete free navigation of the platform, like the good old web, for example? Is that something that, from a business perspective, that makes sense to you, besides also imposing the algorithmic versions, which a lot of people will sign up to?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to touch on just quickly, like when you say give the user what they want, there isn't a homogeneous user. So there are the sophisticated users that are getting the sophisticated articles because that's what's they're most likely to read. Even on some occasions where now we're rolling out programs where, let's say you are reading a story that has a very left tendencies, we are, and through our fact checkers, it might be flagged as inaccurate, and we will suggest to you other stories that are more accurate. We won't take it down necessarily if it's something that doesn't violate the standard, but we'll flag it and say this is something that you might want to consider other things. And we'll also suggest sometimes even a different point of view on the same topic. So we do our best, but ultimately, we're not the editors-in-chief of that. Now, as far as like the navigation of Facebook, we're talking about like the default setting. We're talking about when you log on and what you get to see. For many users, they view you, I always like to compare it is like your news feed is your personalized bespoke newspaper, right? So you get your friends and family, ideally you'd get some news, some humor, like it should be like a kind of a Sunday paper, if you may, right? You can customize that. You can easily say, I want to see this and this and this. I want to see it in this. You can block certain content. It takes a little bit more, maybe, effort from the user to do that, and we allow that. You can join groups. You can have a certain group and read within a certain group, which this group could be purely news.
I think the point, even if you allow a lot of things, I think the point is, could you allow completely free instruments where you put your settings totally the way I want them? Yeah,
but this is what I'm talking about. You can customize what this news feed would look like. Now, us going back to just purely chronological, I don't think that necessarily would benefit publishers, because, yeah, but this is what we did now. Like, so a lot of the feedback that we got is because my mother is not as sophisticated as the New York Times, I don't get to see her posts, right? So she gets buried between the people who are doing meaningful and then the videos, and they're doing lives, and so now a lot of people have gone a little bit away from Facebook and said, like, we've did this with millions of users where they said when they passively scroll, when they don't engage, they passively scroll, they don't necessarily feel engaged nor better about themselves or the world, which is something that for us as a platform goes against what we're trying to do. So we're saying we're going to try to give the content that gets them engaged and get them motivated to comment. And some of that content is obviously friends and family at first, but a lot of it is publisher-generated content that engages users in conversation.
There was another question?
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I think this leads on quite well from that question. This is purely a request for clarification. It seems to be important, though I can't say why, maybe years before I work it out. I feel that in the discussion of algorithms earlier, everybody was talking about the algorithm. So that my user experience is shaped by one algorithm. As if it's like one discrete block of code, even whether it's 10 lines or 10 million lines. My question is, I don't necessarily want to leave this panel with that impression if it's false. So am I dealing with essentially, as a user of Facebook, with one mega algorithm that including customization, is processing all my activity and then serving back to me what it thinks I want? Or am I actually going down a rabbit hole in which there are not only multiple layers of multiple algorithms, but also perhaps other mechanisms which can't strictly be called algorithmic, which come into play to determine what serves up on the page in front of me?
What do you mean by other methods?
Design could be another one.
I'm guessing, I suppose what I'm saying is, can you not, without revealing the secret sauce of the algorithm, can you say more about the architecture?
No, but interaction design would also be one of those aspects, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, you know, and if I had, I mean, I could show you a video that kind of tries to simplify it. But effectively, it is a machine learning algorithm that customizes the solution to your needs. So it's not that there's one big algorithm that processes all the data equally and pushes it out. It looks at what you've seen, time of day, what previous video you focused on. It looks at who this person is, how popular was that post that they posted, and then basically assigns it a score and ranks them according to that score. And that's done in real time, taking your variables into consideration. So it is one processing algorithm, but it's fed by very bespoke data for each person.
Are you happy with that reply? Yeah, good. So time's running out, so we have about 5 minutes left. I thought we would stay on the constructive approaches at the end here, as we promised. We've been on to it a little bit already, but I think I would like to have, starting with Jessica, maybe reflecting a little bit freely about, I mean, we have the enemies of the repressive regimes, we have tech vulnerabilities, we have not really a place at the table, being able to affect all the things we would like to affect, if it's Facebook or if it's policy. What should we do? What is it? What do you see as openings here?
Well, I had to think really hard to find something. No, I'm just kidding. No, I want to just. I have 3 just short points. One is my partner sent me today a Twitter conversation between him and the CEO of Alpha Telecom, which is one of the 2 mobile companies in Lebanon. And we just finished a report using somebody else's methodology to survey the 66 mobile telecom operators in the Arab region and whether or not they make their terms of service and their privacy policies publicly available. It's in a riveting report. But it has a lot of data that did not exist before. And so Hamad, my partner, he was interacting on Twitter and saying, why don't you make your policies publicly available? And Marwan Hayek says, I promise that we will work on it and we need your help probably here to be up to what's required. So, you know, I mean, this is something, right? A public commitment from the head of a company that really, you know, doesn't need to do that. So we are making small incremental steps, and we need to recognize and celebrate those incremental steps. Otherwise, we end up grim, as somebody said in the beginning.
And celebrate them, I think.
Yes. The second point I just want to reiterate is I think especially in this age of Trump and all the other populism and nationalism and all of this that's going on across the world, that we should be looking to the Middle East as a resource for how do we deal with and subvert these regimes that are popping up in other places. And there's a lot to be learned, and we should be looking for that. And Western journalists, I hate this Western whatever, but it's the only way I can say it quickly, should be looking for that and not just looking at the negative things that we all, you know, we can enumerate ad nauseum. So that's one lesson. But finally, I just want to say that if we consider life as a kind of algorithm, which I kind of do, like over and over again, I started thinking about what is the analog to these digital algorithms, and somehow it's life and it's government and it's law and a rule of law. But civil society and independent journalism are the correcting factors in that algorithm that sort of put people at the center and help us mitigate the power of the rest of it. So I just want to keep that in mind and say that it is really important that we support it.
Thank you, Jessica, for that ray of hope. Tom?
So I spent a lot of time working with Facebook on projects and with journalists. The third-party fact-checking initiative that's been launched in different parts of the world and was just launched with Verificado, which is a project we started in Mexico, I think is a very interesting model, not because of the fact-checking in and of itself, but because I think it represents a way for that journalists are getting paid for their work, essentially by selling the data that's produced from their work to Facebook, which is then used to provide a better kind of information ecosystem to its users. So that seems like quite a virtuous circle, and I think that model, and we should look for other opportunities outside of fact-checking for where we can use the valuable data produced by the journalists doing a lot of work to both generate revenue and to improve the user experience and the information accessible to users. So I think these models could be
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about, just as Facebook and what we're trying to do with a lot of journalists. I think a lot of this feedback we get regularly, and so I think a lot of it is taken into consideration. We have the Facebook journalism roundtables where we have publishers sitting around the table giving us feedback on design of the tool and opportunities to monetize. We're rolling out monetization opportunities for many publishers that try to fit the different business model that exists in different regions. We're doing journalism training projects, the fact-checking opportunities that are being rolled out now worldwide for many regions where we work with experienced journalists and organizations to do fact-checking for us, and obviously they get paid for that service, and we benefit. So we're working a lot, and our presence in these events is also something that approach us, talk to us. We have a big booth in the Bufano Hotel, so please stop by, and we're here to listen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, audience, having been here, and thank you for the panel for a really good discussion.
Thank you, Annette, for great moderation.